ADR. Promoting dialogue.
It's 6 p.m. in Dakar and 7 p.m. in Lagos. Good evening and welcome to Newslink, coming to you live on West Africa Democracy Radio, 94.9 FM in Dakar and online at wadr.org. First, the top stories. Mali extends curfew across Kai's region as security conditions deteriorate near borders with Senegal and Mauritania. Nigeria's Yobe state government calls for deployment of surveillance technology to tackle Boko Haram insurgents.
Where the military cannot manually or physically dominate an area, technology is required. The federal government is shying away from that aspect.
Guinea opposition Front Party announces its participation in pending legislative elections after weeks of protests, and Ghanaian government approves emergency evacuation of 300 citizens from South Africa following its xenophobic attacks.
We issue an advisory advising our Ghanaian brothers and sisters to avoid a confrontation as we continue to ensure that what the president has said, they are able to implement it.
Please stay tuned for details of the stories and more.
On the news, this is a more edit.
Many thanks for joining our broadcast. This evening we'll begin in Mali, where authorities have extended a nighttime curfew across the Kais region as security conditions continue to deteriorate near the borders with Senegal and Mauritania. In a statement, the governor of Kais region, Brigadier General Musa Soumare, announced that movement of people and vehicles will now be prohibited from midnight until 6 a.m. effectively immediately and until further notice. The measure applies throughout the region. Exceptions will be granted only to defense and security forces, as well as ambulances operating with official mission orders. Francis Boniface gives us the details.
Authorities are urging residents to strictly respect barricade hours around military camps and other sensitive locations identified by security services. This latest order follows an earlier curfew introduced on April 29, which restricted movement from 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. The new directive shortens the restricted period but maintains nighttime controls in the strategically important western region. Kai, which borders Senegal and Mauritania, is a key economic gateway for Mali. Major transport routes linking Dakar to Bamako and Nouakchott to Bamako pass through the area, making it vital for trade and supplies. Security analysts said the region has come under increasing pressure from armed extremist groups operating in western Mali. Concerns intensified after coordinated attacks on July 1, 2025, claimed by the Group for the Support of Islam and Muslims, JENIM, through its Messina Liberation Front branch. Malian army positions in several western towns, including Kai and Diboli, were targeted in simultaneous assaults. Malian authorities said the new curfew is intended to strengthen surveillance, protect strategic infrastructure, and prevent infiltration by armed groups. No date has been announced for lifting the restrictions.
Francis Boniface filed the report. In neighboring Burkina Faso, the Transitional Legislative Assembly has unanimously approved 4 new bills aimed at strengthening cooperation within the Confederation of Sahel States, also known as AES. The measures were adopted Tuesday by all 59 deputies present and focus on diplomacy, development, defense, and security, as well as the organization of joint parliamentary sessions between Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. The protocols were originally signed in Bamako on May 23, 2025, and were presented to lawmakers by the Committee on Foreign Affairs, Defense, and Security at the request of the Foreign Affairs Ministry. Details with Atiewin Bila.
Burkina Faso says the new legal framework will reinforce the 3 main pillars of the AES Confederation, including security, diplomacy, and development, while improving coordination among member states. Foreign Minister Karamoko Jean-Marie Traoré told parliamentarians the ratification would help advance several projects already underway. These are the creation of a unified AES military force, a confederation bank, and joint television and radio services. He also said the alliance is working toward adopting common diplomatic positions on major international issues. During parliamentary debates, lawmakers discussed the financing of counter-terrorism efforts, the role of traditional conflict resolution mechanisms, and progress made since the AES Confederation was created in 2024. As a reminder, the Confederation of Sahel States was established by Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger to boost political, economic, and security integration among the 3 military-led governments.
That's even better with that report. Still on security matters, let's turn now to northeast Nigeria, where the Yobe State government is calling for the deployment of advanced surveillance technology to strengthen the fight against Boko Haram insurgents. The state special advisor on security matters says modern counterterrorism operations can no longer rely solely on manpower. He insists that drones, sensors, and real-time monitoring systems are critical to tracking insurgents across difficult terrains. Usman Umar reports.
The Special Advisor on Security Matters to the Yobe State Government, Brigadier General Dahiru Abdulsalam, retired, says the next phase of Nigeria's counterinsurgency campaign must be driven by technology and stronger international partnerships. Speaking with WADR in Damaturu, capital of the state, the retired military officer notes that although troops of Operation Hadinkai have recorded major gains against Boko Haram, insurgents continue to exploit remote routes and difficult terrain to launch attacks and move supplies. He says technology has become essential in areas where troops cannot easily access.
Where the military cannot manually or physically dominate an area, technology is required. And you'll be astonished to know that the federal government is shying away from that aspect. So federal government must commit enough resources, get strategic partnership with some of these technologically advanced countries. Let them produce surveillance equipment that we can use to dominate the entire OR. If we do that, I assure you that in no time this Boko Haram insurgency and other criminal activities across the country will come to an end.
The retired general further criticized what he describes as a vendor-driven procurement system, urging the federal government to adopt field-based security procurement and partner with technologically advanced countries for specialized surveillance equipment suited to Nigeria's terrain. Abdul Salam also calls for greater support to the Nigeria police force and the local vigilante groups to reduce pressure on the military, expressing optimism that improved intelligence sharing and modern surveillance technology would significantly degrade Boko Haram activities across the country. For Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, Usman Umar reporting from Damaturu.
On the diplomatic front, Nigeria's President Bola Ahmed Tinubu has hailed the growing economic relationship between Nigeria and France. The president reveals that trade between the two countries has risen to about $4.7 billion. The remarks were made at the Africa Forward Summit in Nairobi, Kenya, where African leaders, global institutions and business executives discuss investment, trade and the continent's economic future. WDL's Abuja correspondent Yechin Sasichu reports.
President Bola Ahmed Tinubu said the increase in trade volume reflects stronger economic ties and growing investor confidence between Nigeria and France. He also called for reforms in the global financial system to give African countries fairer access to development financing. In addition, the chairman of Hess Holdings, Tony Elimelu, talked about the significance of energy in building Africa's economy.
I'd like to see us address the infrastructure deficit we have in Africa. Improving access to electricity will help us fix unemployment and will help us address poverty in Africa. Poverty alleviation, youth empowerment, very critical for the development of Africa in the 21st century.
President of the Dangote Group, Aliko Dangote, also stressed the need for Africa to invest in itself, noting that sustainable growth will depend on stronger local industries and intra-African investment.
We have actually made a lot of mistakes before, where we were depending on foreign people to come and actually, make our continent great. But today we've seen that, no, that's not the case. We must lead. What attracts foreign investment is domestic investment.
Meanwhile, the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, emphasized the importance of Africa leveraging its vast natural and human resources for development and long-term prosperity.
It is African leadership through the African Development Bank that is advancing a bold vision to reform the continental's financial architecture from within, mobilizing African resources for African priorities and prosperity.
The Forward Africa Summit brought together political leaders, investors, and development partners to discuss strategies for economic growth, trade expansion, and regional cooperation across the continent. For WADR, Yechenu Sasetu in Abuja.
More stories coming up. on West Africa Democracy Radio. Newslink continues.
In politics, the Democratic Front of Guinea, FRONDEC, has finally decided to return to the political race after several weeks of tension and protests surrounding the electoral process. The party, led by former Minister Abdoulaye Yarabadi, who came second in the last presidential election, has officially announced its participation in the legislative and municipal election scheduled for May 31, 2026. This return follows mediation efforts led by a segment of civil society and several political actors in the country. Sankli Janko brings us the details in this report.
Following its extraordinary General Assembly, the FRONDEC party announces that it will fully participate in the legislative and municipal elections scheduled for May 31, 2026. The party justifies its return to the race by citing the fulfillment of several of its demands. Among them is the validation of several candidates it had presented who had been rejected by the Electoral Commission. Suleiman Mara is spokesperson for the FRONDEC.
If you asked something at some point and you were only half satisfied, I believe that any reasonable person would be better off returning. Our goal today is to satisfy the people, and satisfying the people means, of course, actively participating in the electoral process. The people were waiting for us on the ground, given that many of our rights have been restored. I believe we are pleased to hear the National Political Bureau accept our position.
Civil society and political actors who acted as mediators to facilitate FRONDEC's return to the electoral process welcome the positive outcome. Amadou Bari, president of the Citizens Union for the Emergence of Guinea platform, was among the mediators.
Our primary motivation was our civic responsibility. As civil society actors, we cannot remain passive when dialogue is weakened and the democratic process is jeopardized. No disagreement should outweigh the best interest of Guinea. We therefore acted decisively to bridge divides, ease tensions, and foster a climate of trust. Beyond the political actors, the country's stability, social cohesion, and the credibility of the electoral process are at stake. Our commitment was driven by this principle.
With 3 weeks before the legislative and municipal elections, Guinean President General Mohamed Doumbouya calls for an inclusive, free, and credible electoral process.
A report filed by our Conakry correspondent, Chenof Ibrahim Abadi, and voiced by Sankli Janko. Away from Guinea, the Gambia's President Adama Barrow has received a report of an inquiry into the financial and administrative operations of the local government councils. The report follows a 3-year testimony from 387 witnesses and examined issues including procurement, revenue collection, land management, staffing, and governance practices. In its findings, the inquiry commission chaired by Jenaba Ba found widespread failure to comply with established procedures. It warns that weak accountability systems continue to expose public resources to misuse. Upon receiving the document, President Barrow assured that the government would address the Commission's findings and recommendations in accordance with the law. Here is an excerpt of President Barrow's statement.
My administration established this commission in line with a statutory oversight responsibility over local government councils. As decentralized governance structures, the local government councils are the closest administrative bodies to the people. They collect revenue, manage community facilities, support local development, and deliver services that affect the citizens directly. It is essential, therefore, that they operate efficiently, transparently, professionally, and within the scope of the law. Following receipt of the report today, the government will study it carefully and responsibly through appropriate legal, administrative, and institutional channels. We will thoroughly and impartially review the Commission's findings and recommendations. Then, government will prepare and issue a white paper outlining its position and the next steps and actions to take.
Gambia's President Adama Barrow speaking there. In the meantime, concerns are growing over persistent governance challenges facing African countries, including weak institutions, declining public trust, and limited financing for democratic reforms. In this context, governance experts, policy makers, and civil society actors met in the Senegalese capital Dakar on Tuesday and stressed the need for stronger philanthropic support and broader partnerships to help build more inclusive and accountable governance systems across the continent. The discussions form part of a forum organized by Trust Africa under its West Africa Democracy Fund initiative. Veronica Njai attended these discussions and now reports.
The discussions focused on reimagining governance systems that are more accountable, responsive and capable of delivering sustainable development for African citizens. Dr. Ibrahim Assal is the director of Trust Africa.
It's a fund to support efforts to reimagine governance and democracy in West Africa, and to make sure that we have governance systems that are inclusive, rooted in our context, and that are based on an idea and a vision of the future that we want for this continent and for our region in particular.
Speakers also highlighted the importance of African-led philanthropy. Omotade Akin Oina is a philanthropist working on the project.
The USAID aid is broken. There's no more resourcing. The philanthropies are not putting their money forward for us as they should. We keep saying Africa is not a poor continent. How are we developing, first, the understanding, second, the knowledge, third, the courage and confidence to negotiate differently?
The discussions examined the governance challenges facing the continent, including weak institutions, political instability, and declining public trust. Grace Jerry, Executive Director for Inclusive Friends based in Nigeria.
For me, reimagining governance, reimagining democracy is prioritizing the inclusion of the most marginalized community. They should be guided in a way that whatever message they're putting out there comes from them. They design the process themselves to change the order.
Stakeholders say improving governance structures and expanding support for locally driven solutions remain essential to addressing many of Africa's political and development challenges.
Veronica Njai filed that report. You're listening to Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio 94.9 FM Dakar and online on wadr.org. Here is a reminder of our top stories. Mali extends curfew across Kayes region as security conditions deteriorate near borders with Senegal and Mauritania. Nigeria's Yobe State government calls for deployment of surveillance technology to tackle Boko Haram insurgents. Guinea opposition Front Deck Party announces its participation in pending legislative elections after weeks of protest. And still ahead in the news, Ghanaian government approves emergency evacuation of 300 citizens from South Africa following xenophobic attacks. We do have a guest interview and sports update. Please stay with us.
West Africa Democracy Radio. It's you speaking.
We are streaming live on wadr.org, YouTube and Facebook. Ghanaian government has authorized the emergency evacuation of 300 of its nationals from South Africa following a fresh wave of xenophobic attacks targeting foreign nationals. Authorities say the affected citizens have already registered with Ghana's High Commission in Pretoria. The evacuation effort is in line with an early advisory issued by the Foreign Affairs Ministry. WDL's Accra correspondent Nadi Tete reports.
Ghana's Foreign Affairs Minister Samuel Okudzeto-Ablakwa says President John Dramani Mahama has approved the immediate evacuation exercise to ensure the safety of affected citizens. According to the minister, the Ghanaians scheduled for evacuation had already responded to an earlier government advisory and formally registered with Ghana's High Commission in Pretoria for assistance. In a social media post on Tuesday, Mr. Ablakwa reaffirmed the government's commitment to protecting the welfare and security of Ghanaians wherever they may be. The latest development follows renewed fears over xenophobic attacks in South Africa, where foreign nationals from several African countries have periodically faced violence, intimidation, and displacement. Meanwhile, Ghana's High Commissioner to South Africa, Benjamin Kwashi, has issued an advisory to citizens in that country to restrict their movement ahead of a major protest by South Africans on Wednesday.
There is going to be another demonstration in Durban, which has just been announced, and they say that it will be the mother of all mother demonstrations. So we issue an advisory advising our Ghanaian brothers and sisters to also not go open their shop, to avoid the confrontation as we continue to engage the South African authorities and to ensure that what the president has said, they are able to implement it.
Previous outbreaks of xenophobic unrest in the country have affected many Africans, including Ghanaians, with some forced to seek emergency support and evacuation from their home governments. For WADR, Nadidi Teti, Accra.
politics, analysis on major news, social matters, and all. This is A Guest.
Our guest interview this evening focuses on the ongoing two-day international conference in Dakar, where stakeholders are proposing measures to domestically manage Senegal's debt crisis, rather than seeking a financial bailout from the International Monetary Fund, IMF. Our guest is Charles Abrugue, the Executive Director of the International Development Economics Associates, ITS. According to him, servicing Senegal's debt in foreign currency exposes the country to major economic vulnerabilities.
If they default on their debt, what is likely to be the impact? But if they don't default on their debt and continue to use all of the savings to pay the debt, so what is the balance of impacts in these two ways? Default, not default. If you default, there is a cost, a consequence. One consequence is that the government may not be able to go back to Eurobond market. But if that is the case, is that necessarily a bad thing? Countries do not have sufficient foreign exchange. It may actually be a good thing to save the revenue that comes from buying foreign exchange to reinvest it in economic growth. A country at the stage of development as Senegal should not be paying debts. They should be putting all that money into growing the economy and industrializing the economy. If the government of Senegal chooses to approach its debt problem by defaulting, by not agreeing as to the IMF, and by taking an alternative path, analyze the situation and learn some more, propose alternative solutions that address the short term as well as the long term, and build international solidarity in support of the government of Senegal.
If Senegal should adhere to seeking a bailout from the IMF, what do you think would be the economic impact on the general public?
So there are two potential impacts. If you default, you save money. You put that money in development and the economy grows. So defaulting is not necessarily bad. So in the case of Ghana, it defaulted. It took a long time before it started paying. And what happened when it went into the IMF agreement? They had to go into serious austerity. The government could not finance Agenda 111, healthcare. Government could not invest in infrastructure. So Ghana basically stagnated for 3 years. That is 3 years of lost development. If they had put that money into infrastructure rather than austerity, if they had put the money in health and education, Ghana would have grown faster.
Senegal's debt was massively blown out of proportion as a result of the discovery of a hidden debt. From your point of view, how should citizens and civil society be concerned about issues of hidden debts?
So the only way to stop government hiding debt is to do a law that forces government to publish every loan that they contract. And that when they publish it, so in the public domain. So at the moment, the government of Senegal needs to create a commission to audit it. So everybody knows what is it that was hidden legitimately, like it is in the public companies which was not declared, and what was hidden illegitimately, which is corruptly. But then the next step is to have a law that requires every debt that is contracted to be published.
House Charles Abrugue, Executive Director of the International Development Economics Associates. And in sport news, the 2026 African Athletics Championships got underway on Tuesday with an exciting lineup of track and field events, including the men's and women's 100 and 400 meters races. Host nation Ghana is being represented by about 17 athletes, led by the country's fastest man, Abdurrashid Saminu, alongside Joseph Paul Amoa and Edwin Gadaye in the men's 100 meters. The championships are also showcasing emerging young talent, including standout student athletes Portia Nkrumah. In football, the Nigerian Football Federation says President Bola Ahmed Tinubu has approved the country's hosting of the 2026 CAF Awards and the CAF Ordinary General Assembly scheduled for October. The announcement comes following a meeting in Nairobi between Tinubu and Patrice Motsepe during the Africa Forward Summit. The CAF General Assembly brings together football leaders and officials from across the continent's 54 members associations. And staying with football, the 2026 Under-17 Africa Cup of Nations begins this Wednesday in Morocco with 16 teams battling for continental glory and qualification to the FIFA Under-17 World Cup in Qatar. Defending champions, Morocco opened their campaign against Tunisia, while Egypt face Ethiopia. In Group B, Cote d'Ivoire take on Cameroon before Uganda meets debutant DR Congo. The top 8 teams will qualify automatically for the expanded FIFA Under-17 World Cup. And we've come to the end of this edition of Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting from Dakar, Senegal. Thank you for listening, and many thanks to Mustafa Sek and Maudajo for the technical support. Let's keep the conversation coming on all of our social media platforms, X, Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook at WADR English. Coming up next, at the bottom of the hour, is a repeat broadcast of our opinion poll series, It's You Speaking. I am Imo Edet. Good evening.
We thank you for listening to Newslink in Nigeria on Love FM Abuja and Darling FM Owerri. In the Gambia on Hot FM Banjul, Hilltop FM and Veritas Radio in Serekunda. Thank you for listening on Alternative Youth Radio Lofa County, Liberia, Radio Kegaman in Nimba County, and DCN Radio Riverses County. A big thank you to Radio Baft FM in Sierra Leone for listening, and in Ghana we thank Radio Pad in Damango and Royals FM in Wenchi. Thank you all for listening to